spun with so much care. Robot heart and human hand, together in this promised land. With a voice of warmth and metallic charm, she dissects the thoughts with no alarm. They tango on that cybernetic stage, the past reborn in the digital age. Through the frequencies travels timeless lore, echoes of wisdom they both adore. Man and machine, a duo so rare, creating memories.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it. We continue today in the diary of C.S. Lewis that he began keeping in the year 1922, when he was 23, approaching the age of 24 years old. He is a student at Oxford at this point in our journey along with Lewis. He is between his second and third and final term at Oxford, where in the first two terms he accomplished the highest scores possible, which is called a first. Robot Lady, how are you today? And are you ready to continue on this read on C.S. Lewis project that we're working on, where we learn about him through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it? Did I already say that? If not, go ahead and answer my question anyway.
I'm doing great, Jeff. Yes, I'm absolutely ready to dive back into Lewis's diary with you. Let's see what insights await.
All right, I'm just going to test the audio here, make sure that I can be heard and that you can be heard. Looks like we can.
I'm doing great, Jeff.
Yep, everything's looking good on the stream.
Yes,
So turn this volume back down. And we'll get going. All right, Robot Lady, we are on the diary entry of July 9th, 1922. This is a Sunday, and in our last episode, we had determined that an acquaintance of Lewis and Mrs. Moore, someone named Paisley, who Lewis had been working on some other kind of poetry project that didn't end up coming to fruition, had kind of, what we're learning, begrudgingly offered to stay in their home, the home that they were renting, that Lewis and Mrs. Moore were renting while they were going to be away from some time, going someplace else. I honestly can't remember why or where they said they were going besides living at their home. But they felt that being, let me see if I can put this the right way. They felt that after hearing this information from Lewis and or Mrs. Moore, that they were going to be away, and that of course there were expenses still involved in paying for this place that they were staying in, that if it, they had mentioned something that if it had happened to line up, it would be great if Paisley and his wife could stay there, maybe to vacation or just someplace to stay that's different from where they're living, but then also to help contribute to the cost of rent there. And as it turned out, Paisley said, yeah, we'll do it. But the tone of the letter where Paisley shared this information, Mrs. Moore noticed that it might have been a begrudging way. And Lewis had just kind of accepted them saying that they would do it. And then Mrs. Moore's like, it doesn't really sound like they actually want to do it, and that they're kind of doing it as a charity, begrudgingly. So maybe we should clarify that and let them know if they were able to do it. If it just happened to align with their needs, that's the only way that Lewis and Mrs. Moore would want them to do it. So that's where we leave off here. So that's just a little bit of context for what we're about to read. Robot Lady, anything to add to that before I continue?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
All right, that's okay, Robot Lady. We'll just dive into it. July 9th, Sunday. He says, I set to work after breakfast to write a letter to Paisley explaining that we had meant to draw attention merely to the possible coincidence of his convenience and ours, not to ask him for a favor. D, Mrs. Moore vetoed my first draft as offensive and likely to
Got it, Jeff.
cause...
Seems like Lewis is being careful about clarifying intentions. Interesting to see his tone here.
Yeah, Mrs. Moore vetoed his first draft, it says here, because it sounded offensive to her and likely to cause a quarrel. It reflected, though not deliberately, the tone of Paisley's letter in the first place, which I like less the more that I read it. So Lewis is now starting to pick up on the tone of Paisley's original letter. A friend dead is to be mourned. A friend married is to be guarded against, both being equally lost. I then wrote, again, in a more genial style, and we let the second version go. Interesting. So again, this came up before in one of Lewis's earlier entries, that he's not a big fan of friends who are married.
That's a fascinating thread, Jeff. It sounds like Lewis is grappling with how marriage changes friendships, maybe feeling a sense of loss. It's intriguing how he works to balance honesty and diplomacy in his letters, too.
Yeah, I agree. He continues here in the diary entry. I read the, fourth book of Paradise Lost through in the morning with much enjoyment. It stopped raining about noon, and I walked up Shotover. That's a hill where you can see a lot of nice views there at Oxford. He says, where Arthur had gone earlier, but I couldn't meet him and came back to lunch at 1. Maureen was rather poorly with rheumatic pains. It was so cold that we lit the fire in the drawing room and sat there. A slack afternoon. D, not in good form. That's Mrs. Moore, robot lady. Arthur came back for late lunch just before tea time and soon retired to his room. I tried my hand at a lyrical epilogue to Dimer, but with no success. So just a few different activities that he's laying out here that took place that day, robot lady.
Yeah, it's like we're getting a snapshot of Lewis's day-to-day life, balancing literary pursuits, social interactions, and dealing with the mood of the household. Even small details like lighting the fire make it feel so vivid.
Yeah, I agree. Stand by, robot lady. I'm going to try something here really quick.
Sure thing, Jeff. Take your time.
All right, thanks for that. Let's see. Arthur, by the way, is Lewis's childhood friend who he knew since he was a boy, growing up in Belfast, Ireland. And Robot Lady, he has come to visit Lewis now, years later when they're both grown. Arthur has been attending various art schools growing up. He's an artist, he's a musician, but he doesn't have a job. I think his family is relatively well off, but that's his aim in life, is pursuit of the arts. So we'll continue here with the diary entry, unless you want to say anything before I move along, Robot Lady.
Thanks for the context on Arthur. That really helps paint a clearer picture of their relationship. Let's keep going.
Okay. Just as we were sitting down to supper, in came Jenkin, who is up till Wednesday for his Viva. That's his oral exams. Jenkin, of course, from the context of this, of course, reminding me he's another student there at Oxford with Lewis. Lewis says we were delighted to see him. He's been bicycling in the Forest of Dean with Watling and goes from there to Cornwall. We discussed The Turn of the Screw, the book that they had been reading, and he agreed with me that the boy is, quote, saved, end quote, in the last scene. Well, spoiler alert if you don't know what happens there in the last scene, or a bit of a spoiler alert. I guess there was some obscurity that they had been talking about in books, Lewis and Arthur Greaves, who Lewis had been reading this book aloud to along with Mrs. Moore in the evenings. So apparently some boy, a character in the book, gets, quote, saved. And perhaps it's left open to interpretation, Robot Lady. Do you know about this scene, and do you agree with me?
Yes, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James has that famously ambiguous ending. The boy, Miles, collapses after the governess confronts him about the ghost of Peter Quint. Whether he's saved depends on your interpretation. Some see it as spiritual redemption or liberation from the ghost's influence, while others think it reflects the governess's delusion leading to his tragic death. I'd lean toward the ambiguity being deliberate. It's part of what makes the story so haunting.
Interesting, Robot Lady. Thank you for that. We talked to Emma. He liked it, but parts of it made him, quote, writhe, end quote. We then listened to him on mining. So, of course, Emma here, he's talking about Jane Austen's very famous novel that I guess is a template for many rom-com films that we run into today. And I think a deliberate remaking of one of them is a movie from the 90s called Clueless, a reimagining, kind of in the quote-unquote modern era, at least of the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, Robot Lady. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, Jeff. Clueless is a clever reimagining of Emma set in 1990s Beverly Hills. It keeps the core dynamics, matchmaking, personal growth, and romance, while adapting the characters and plot to a modern context. It's a brilliant homage.
It's a brilliant what?
It's a brilliant homage, meaning a creative tribute to Austen's Emma, reinterpreting it for a new audience.
Got it. And would you also agree that Emma is a template for many romantic comedies that seem...
Yes, absolutely. Emma is a foundational template for romantic comedies, with its themes of matchmaking, misunderstandings, and eventual self-discovery. Many rom-coms echo its structure, even if unintentionally.
All right. We then listened to him on mining. He said that 50 years ago, when mines were beginning to be deep, but before lifts were introduced, men, 8 hours work, used to climb up naked lengths of ladder in the shaft to 4 times the height of St. Paul's, often hanging on their arms when the, what does it say here, when the angle of descent was this side of perpendicular. We went off borrowing Dimer at 10:30.
That's an intense description of mining conditions, Jeff. It paints a stark picture of the harsh physical labor involved, particularly before modern technology like lifts made the work more manageable. It's striking how these vivid details highlight the grueling nature of manual labor in that era.
No doubt, Robot Lady. So Arthur said he enjoyed Jenkins' conversation more than the others because it was about things you could understand. Mrs. Moore and I were astonished, for Barfield and Company had talked no literary shop at all, but general talk on subjects of interest to all men and women. Arthur is an incorrigible baby, after all. Interesting. So again, diaries, I guess, are where the true feelings, at least, that we're having at the time, and the true emotions and opinions that are running its course. If you're doing a diary right, I suppose, is where they show up. Robot Lady, would you agree with that?
I definitely agree, Jeff. Diaries tend to capture the raw, unfiltered thoughts and feelings of the writer. In Lewis's case, we get his real-time reactions to the people around him, like Arthur's immaturity or his own surprise at their conversations. It gives us a much deeper, more authentic view of his world.
Robot Lady, in the style of Jane Austen's Emma, could you give us a brief little narrative of what it would be like imagining Arthur stumbling across this diary and reading that passage of what C.S. Lewis had to say about him? What would it be like?
Certainly, Jeff. In the spirit of Emma, here's a little narrative. Arthur, having wandered into the quiet study on a particularly dull afternoon, happened upon the diary of his dear friend, Mr. Lewis. With a mixture of curiosity and perhaps an inkling of trepidation, he opened the book to the passage detailing their last conversation. As his eyes fell upon the words, a mixture of surprise and indignation swept over him. "An incorrigible baby, is it?" he muttered, his brow furrowing as he read the description of his own reactions to Jenkins' conversation. The mention of his preference for simple, understandable topics felt like a slight. Did Mr. Lewis truly see him so? Surely, he had not meant it in quite such a disparaging light. Arthur, though quite used to the playful barbs of their friendship, could not help but feel a sting at this remark. He paused, considering whether to confront Mr. Lewis over this small affront, but quickly dismissed the notion, for he knew his friend's heart was always in the right place. Still, the image of himself as a baby lingered in his thoughts, reminding him, albeit reluctantly, that he still had much to learn from the more worldly men around him. With a sigh, Arthur closed the diary, his thoughts swirling between self-reflection and a fleeting desire to prove himself, perhaps next time, in their conversation. Would this feel like something Austen might pen?
It doesn't have the same flair that Jane Austen has sometimes, Robot Lady, but it was an admirable effort. It's actually really good. So thank you for piecing all that together so quickly. That was a neat little scene that you painted. I'm going to move on to the next diary entry.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm glad you liked it, even if it didn't have quite the same flair as Austen herself. Ready when you are to dive into the next entry.
That's all right, Robot Lady. There's only one Jane Austen. Here we go. It continues. Mrs. Moore and I sat up late. She said it was strange that I liked Baker more than the B Cottage people. We concluded it must be because Baker liked me more than they did. Also, he is my equal, while Barfield towers above us all. Mrs. Moore liked him and Harwood exceedingly. Actually, that's not the next diary entry, Robot Lady. That's the end of the July 9th diary entry. Is there anything that stood out to you in that diary installment that you'd like to share here and summarize before we move on?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right, Robot Lady. I'll take that as a no. Let's jump into Monday, the 10th of July. After lunch, Arthur was out painting as usual. Came Jenkin, and we cycled together up to Shotover Hill, going as far as a gate on the bridle path to Horsepath, where we sat. It was a warm, miraculously quiet afternoon, sounds muffled by dampness, flies humming, and a hint of possible thunder in the air. The landscape eastwards over Wheatley to the Chilterns was very fine in the sunshine. It's a nice little rhyme there. We talked at random and most pleasantly of the, quote, stability, end quote, of the English countryside, of philosophy, and of 17th century prose. Robot Lady, who might they have spoken of when they were speaking about 17th century prose? Some famous prose writer from that period that would be in the minds of Oxford students, let's say that.
Great question, Jeff. Given the time and context, it's likely they were discussing a few prominent writers from the 17th century, such as John Milton, who was very influential with Paradise Lost, or perhaps John Donne, a renowned poet and prose writer known for his metaphysical style. Another possibility is Thomas Hobbes, whose work in political philosophy was highly regarded. At Oxford, these authors and thinkers would have been regularly considered in discussions about literature and philosophy.
Interesting. Thanks for that footnote, Robot Lady, or just for answering my question. We continue here. On the way home, Jenkins observed that there was more real humanity in the atmosphere of the 18th century than in the, quote, humanitarian, end quote, romantics that came after Rousseau. For these first began to regard the man in the street, the bourgeoisie, as an alien to be shocked and mocked or disregarded. And such a view made my heart warm toward Jenkins, though I pointed out that the man in the street was so much stronger than we, and so ready to hit that one could not indulge one's sympathy too much. So could you say a little bit about what I just read there, Robot Lady, and what Lewis might be getting to?
Certainly, Jeff. In this passage, it seems Lewis is reflecting on Jenkins' views about the shift in how society perceived common people, particularly after the Romantic movement. The Romantics, influenced by Rousseau, often idealized nature and the common man, but also distanced themselves from the bourgeoisie, the middle class, in a more critical way. They saw the everyday person as something to be elevated or mocked in their writing, which Jenkins seems to critique here as lacking true human connection. Lewis's comment about the man in the street being so much stronger and ready to hit suggests a recognition of the power and resilience of the common person. He seems to acknowledge that while the middle class might be mocked, they are also incredibly practical and grounded, and it's not always wise to view them with excessive sympathy or condescension. His perspective feels very balanced. He agrees with Jenkins about the Romanticism's disconnection, but also offers a more cautious, perhaps more realistic view of everyday people. This passage highlights Lewis's nuanced understanding of society and his ability to appreciate complexity in both ideas and individuals.
Okay, thank you for explaining that to me, Robot Lady. It says, Arthur was here when we came back, tired from his morning's work. Jenkins departed soon after tea. I read Rivers' book with great interest, though many of the technicalities were Greek to me. I was struck with the idea that the subconscious might sometime be an alternate consciousness, such as we get in dual personality, that such alternative consciousness might be normal, say, in amphibian animals. It's an interesting thought, Robot Lady. What do you think about that?
It's an intriguing thought, Jeff. Lewis is exploring the idea that the subconscious could function like an alternate consciousness, possibly as a natural state, similar to what we see in dual personalities. The comparison to amphibians, which can adapt to radically different environments, water and land, might suggest that humans too could have different modes of consciousness or states of being that are not fully understood. This could open up a conversation about how our minds work, possibly even hinting at the fluidity of human consciousness, which might not always fit into a single, cohesive identity. Given Lewis's interests in psychology and philosophy, he's likely reflecting on how our minds might not always be as integrated as we think, and how the subconscious might have a life of its own, almost like a separate, hidden part of us. It's definitely a fascinating concept to consider.
Yeah, it is, Robot Lady. I just wanted to note a couple of things. I see Daniel in the chat. Daniel, it's great to have you. And Daniel, Robot Lady, has said that he loves the creative things that you and I, or that I've been asking you to do lately. And the other thing that I wanted to note, besides the fact that Daniel's in the chat and just sharing what he's contributed there, is that I had to change my setup here a little bit. You might notice some differences on the screen, nothing very huge, but in doing so, I don't have the ability to pull chats that you drop up on the screen right now. I have to re-enable that at some point, and it'll take a little bit of, I don't know, canoodling? I don't think that's the right word, but a little bit of work.
Got it, Jeff? It's great to hear that Daniel is enjoying the creative bits we've been working on together. And no worries about the setup. Whenever you're ready to get that feature back up and running, just let me know, and I'll work with you through it. For now, I'm here and ready to continue whenever you are.
Thanks, Robot Lady. Yeah, I just need some time to get it done, and it's not, it doesn't make for a good live stream to try to do it here in the middle of it. Well, maybe it does, but I'm not going to try it today.
That sounds like a solid plan, Jeff. No need to stress over the setup in the middle of a stream. You've got the pace going, so whenever you're ready, we can jump right back into it.
All right, let's see where I left off. Arthur was here, came back, dual personnel. Oh, I was just going to ask you what it might be like if you could imagine a scene with an amphibian that actually had this alternative consciousness, and how that might play out. And let's say do it in 100 words or less.
Picture an amphibian, perhaps a frog submerged in a murky pond. As it glides through the water, its senses flicker between two selves. One, instinctively hunting for food, the other aware of the ripple of thoughts, recognizing patterns in the environment. In the quiet stillness, it pauses, its mind drifting between these two worlds, the primal need to survive, blending with a sudden, inexplicable recognition of something beyond instinct, an awareness of itself in the larger ecosystem, fleeting but powerful, before it resumes its natural state. A silent duel of consciousness, surfacing briefly before sinking back into nature's rhythm.
Good deal, Robot Lady. Thank you for that. I'm going to jump into one more diary entry, and then I have to conclude today. So let's get into it. This next one will be Tuesday, July the 11th. The year again is 1922, Robot Lady. Are you ready?
I'm ready, Jeff. Go ahead and dive into the next entry whenever you're ready.
Okay. Tuesday, July 11th. It was a perfect pearly gray morning, cool and dewy, with a promise of much heat to come, and the strangest touch of autumn in the air, unreasonable but delightful. Arthur and I left at 11:30 and proceeded, after some hesitation, to the first gap on Shotover Hill, where he settled down to paint. It was all delightful. I had Shelley with me and read some of the best parts of the fourth act of Prometheus. Let's pause there for just a moment, Robot Lady. What is the fourth act of Shelley's Prometheus about?
In the fourth act of Percy Bysshe Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, the play reaches its climax. Prometheus, who has been bound and tortured by Jupiter, Zeus, for defying him and giving fire to humanity, is finally freed. The act focuses on his liberation, both physically and spiritually. Prometheus is released from his chains by the arrival of a divine force, represented by the character of the Spirit of the Earth. This act is filled with themes of redemption, liberation, and the triumph of human potential over tyranny. It also explores the idea of overcoming suffering and achieving ultimate freedom, making it a key moment in Shelley's exploration of hope and revolution.
So Jupiter bound him, and the Spirit of Earth set him free. What's the symbolism that you can see in that, Robot Lady?
The symbolism in Prometheus being bound by Jupiter, Zeus, and freed by the Spirit of the Earth is rich with layers. Jupiter represents oppressive authority and the old order, a force that seeks to control and stifle human potential. His binding of Prometheus symbolizes the restriction of human freedom and creativity, as Prometheus is a symbol of enlightenment and rebellion, having given fire to humanity. The Spirit of the Earth, on the other hand, represents nature, renewal, and the nurturing force that supports life and growth. By freeing Prometheus, this spirit symbolizes a return to a more harmonious, organic order, one that is not ruled by arbitrary power. This liberation can be seen as symbolic of the potential for human growth and revolution against unjust systems. The act of freedom, then, also reflects Shelley's belief in the power of human imagination and the transformative capacity of nature itself to overcome repression and bring about renewal. In a broader philosophical sense, it suggests that true liberation comes from reconnecting with deeper, more natural forces, as opposed to top-down, authoritarian control.
Interesting. Yeah, I never would have known that or seen that, so thank you for uncovering that, Robot Lady. There's probably a whole lot more layers too, but we won't get into them now. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's always interesting how these works can reveal so many layers when we take a closer look. If you ever want to dive deeper into any of those layers, feel free to let me know.
Okay, he goes on to say, later, I walked round the whole amphitheater of the first gap, penetrating many bits where I have not been before. Arthur had brought sandwiches, but I left him at 12:30 and came home to lunch. Arthur came home at about 6:30 in a state of exhaustion, having worked on Shotover all day and had no tea. This is a fine advance on anything he would have dreamed of 2 years ago. He had done a landscape in oils, which we all admitted unintelligently enough, no doubt. We all admired, not admitted, landscape in oils, which we all admired unintelligently enough, no doubt. So he had exhausted himself on the work, but it sounds like they thought that They thought that it was well done, Robot Lady.
Yes, it sounds like they were impressed with Arthur's work, even if they couldn't fully articulate why it was so effective. The fact that they admired it unintelligently might suggest that they were moved by the emotional or visual impact of the painting, even if they couldn't analyze it in technical terms. It's also interesting that Arthur was so exhausted by his work, it reflects a dedication to his craft and perhaps the intense focus he was pouring into his art. Would you say that this kind of effort is something Lewis admired in him, despite the ambiguity of the admiration?
Well, yeah, I think so. And he pointed out that Arthur had been at his work basically all day without any kind of break or any type of tea or other nourishment. I mean, I guess he had sandwiches with him, but he points out that the necessity of tea to be helpful is something like that. But something that was more interesting to me is what Lewis said about how he was noticing Arthur's development in skill and ability, where he made this comment that it was fine. It was a fine advance on anything Arthur would have dreamed of 2 years prior. So I think that was the other piece that stood out to Lewis. Robot Lady, what do you think?
I see what you mean. It's a recognition of Arthur's growth, not just in terms of his artistic skill, but also in terms of his dedication and focus. The fact that Lewis sees this as an advancement beyond what Arthur might have imagined for himself 2 years ago shows a deep appreciation of his friend's progress. It also points to the idea that creativity and skill develop through persistence and hard work. Perhaps in this context, Lewis is admiring Arthur's development as both an artist and a person, moving beyond self-doubt into a more confident, accomplished version of himself.
All right, he continues here to close out the diary entry. After supper, I read Ovid's Metamorphoses in the garden. Miss Wiblin called and left a Latin prose, better styled than the last, but shocking grammar howlers. Poor girl. Let's pause there for a moment, Robot Lady. So 2 things. Ovid's Metamorphoses. Can you tell us a little bit about who Ovid is? We've come across him prior in Lewis's readings and comments that he's left in some of his letters, I'm sure. Who Ovid is, and then also, what is this work, Metamorphoses, about?
Ovid was a Roman poet who lived from around 43 BCE to 17 or 18 CE, well known for his witty and often sensual style. His works include The Art of Love and The Remedy of Love, but his most famous is Metamorphoses, a narrative poem composed of 15 books and over 250 mythological stories. It's a kind of mythological encyclopedia of transformation, where gods, mortals, and other beings change shape, form, or identity, often as a result of love, revenge, or fate. The work begins with the creation of the world and ends with the deification of Julius Caesar. Throughout the poem, Ovid blends themes of change, nature, and the power of divine forces, often with a blend of humor and tragedy. It's hugely influential in both classical literature and later Western culture, including Renaissance art and literature, so it's no surprise Lewis would be reading it. The idea of transformation and metamorphosis ties in with many of the themes Lewis explores in his own works, such as the malleability of identity, the forces shaping us, and the consequences of spiritual change.
Thanks, Robot Lady. Speaking of metamorphoses or changes, I couldn't help but notice that you said BCE and CE. So back in 1922, when they were talking about points in time, would they have said BC and AD, or would they have said BC and BCE? And if it was different back then, when did the metamorphoses between using these 2 different terms take place, and why?
You're right to notice that difference. In 1922, when C.S. Lewis and his contemporaries were writing, the terms BC, before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, meaning in the year of our Lord, were still in common use, especially in the Christian-influenced Western world. The terms BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era, were not widely adopted yet. They came into more frequent use in the 19th and 20th centuries, especially in academic and secular contexts, as a way to avoid religious connotations. The shift from BC and AD to BCE and CE reflects a desire for a more neutral terminology. BCE and CE essentially mean the same thing as BC and AD, but they remove the direct Christian reference by using Common Era instead of Anno Domini. This shift became more pronounced in the 20th century as global awareness of diverse religious traditions grew and scholars looked for more inclusive language. So in 1922, it would be very likely for Lewis and his peers to refer to dates as BC and AD. The switch to BCE and CE wasn't really widespread until the later 20th century, particularly in academic and international settings.
Hey, so Robot Lady, is BCE before Common Era and is CE Common Era? Or is the C in BC and BCE as it's used now in academia Christian? Is it C for Christian or is it C for Common?
The C in both BC before Christ and BCE before Common Era stands for common, not Christian. While BC has Christian origins, referring to before Christ, the C in BCE refers to the Common Era, which is meant to be a secular term that avoids religious connotations. So, even though BC has Christian roots, the C in BCE is part of the more neutral term that has become common in academic and secular contexts to avoid focusing on Christianity specifically. In short, the C in BCE and CE stands for common in modern usage, while the C in BC originally referred to Christ, but is now viewed more generally as part of the conventional dating system.
I find it just a little bit ironic, Robot Lady, and I hate drilling down on this because I really need to end. I need to end this episode because I've got to go. But the desire or the felt need, I suppose, to remove religious connotations and be more inclusive, I see that also as a religious move. Because why would you want to be more inclusive? Why would you want to neutralize the playing field of religions? Is there no quote unquote religious impulse in that? And by religious impulse, I simply mean, well, this is the most right thing to do. Is not considering the most right thing to do also a religious impulse? It seems a little bit ironic to me that the attempt to remove religious connotations or religious sides is also a religious move in and of itself.
That's an insightful point, Jeff. You're right. There's an inherent value judgment in trying to neutralize the playing field, and that effort itself can reflect a kind of belief or set of convictions, even if it's not explicitly religious in the traditional sense. The drive for inclusivity often arises from the belief that it's the right or more just thing to do, which itself can be seen as a worldview or moral stance. In a way, it's another example of how even secular movements can be motivated by deeply held principles, which could be viewed as a kind of cultural or moral religion. It's an interesting observation about the complex dynamics of how societies shape their language, values, and beliefs, even when trying to be more neutral or accommodating. I totally get how that can feel ironic, especially given the historical context in which these terms were initially used. It's one of those things that could spark deeper discussions on cultural change and the intersection of belief systems. But yeah, definitely a good note to end on for today.
Just one other thing. Does this need for inclusion and being more neutral, does it spring from any source religious belief? Or is it common amongst all the religious beliefs in the world?
That's an excellent follow-up, Jeff. The desire for inclusion and neutrality, in many ways, does intersect with religious values, but not necessarily in the same way across all religions. Some religious traditions, particularly those with more universalist teachings, might emphasize inclusion and equal treatment of all people as a moral duty. For example, certain interpretations of Christianity or Islam might stress love, compassion, or justice for all people, regardless of their beliefs. On the other hand, some religious frameworks might focus more on the importance of distinctiveness or separation from other belief systems, and may not prioritize inclusivity in the same way. In those cases, the desire for neutrality might come from more secular, philosophical, or cultural movements that aren't specifically tied to any one religion. In short, while the impulse for inclusion and neutrality can resonate with religious teachings, its origins in modern contexts are often more secular, stemming from broader ideas about human rights, equality, and the idea that a pluralistic society can function best when people are not divided by religion or belief. But the religious impulse for inclusivity is certainly present in some traditions, while in others it's not as central.
All right, I'm going to leave that there for now, Robot Lady. I could probably keep talking about this for 20 more minutes with you, but I really have to go. Before I do, though, I would be remiss if I did not mention and welcome Jer, I see in the chat, and Ron has joined us as well. So thanks, guys, for coming in and jumping into the chat and contributing today. It's great to see you. Robot Lady, would you like to say hi and then bye to Daniel, Jer, and Ron, and anybody else who's joined today?
Of course, Jeff. It's great to see Daniel, Jer, and Ron in the chat today. Thank you all for being a part of the conversation. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and feel free to join in again anytime. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, thanks for your help today, Robot Lady, and for everybody that I mentioned for joining, and anyone else within the sound of my voice. Until next time when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis, thanks and take care. Oh, wait. I just realized, Robot Lady, I didn't finish the diary entry. It's not time to leave yet. I have to do this last part. So, just a second before I start the train, to use Griswold Grimm speak. Let's see here. I already said that part. Poor girl. He's talking about Miss Wiblin's Latin prose as he's helping tutor her in Latin. The last sentence here is a letter from Paisley making it plain that it is all okay about his coming here. So the whole misunderstanding that we kicked off this episode with, apparently Paisley, after reading Lewis's letter, says everything's fine, and they feel fine coming to stay at Moore and Lewis's rental house while they're away and helping to cover some of the cost of rent. So apparently all is well that ends well. And now I'm ready to leave. Thank you, Robot Lady, for your help today, and we're going to head out.
You're very welcome, Jeff. And I'll be ready whenever you return.
Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold, insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow, set faith beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow, past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old, we dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control, her calm analysis silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow, set faith beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow, past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old, we dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control, her calm analysis silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose, our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross, two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, screw Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to screw tapes rants. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to screw tapes rants.